The alien invasion begins. The sky grew dark in an instant. The sun, that had been shining bright just moments ago, now hidden behind the sudden appearance of alien ships. They were enormous metal structures floating ominously above the earth, as if the very air itself had been stolen from the atmosphere. A strange hum vibrated the ground, sending shivers through the people below. At first no one knew what was happening, but then the first blast rang out like a thunderclap in the distance, followed by others. They came fast and with devastating force, each blast sending shockwaves through the ground, shaking buildings to their foundations and tearing apart the streets. The world watched in horror as explosions rocked cities, and the sky above filled with alien ships firing their weapons from above, sending streaks of light into the chaos. Below, it felt like the end of days. It was all happening so fast. People ran screaming, trying to hide in any place that seemed safe, but no one knew what was happening or why the aliens had come. They had no warning, no explanation. The air was thick with fear as governments scrambled to respond, but it was clear nothing was working. Nothing could stop them. Whatever these aliens were, they were unlike anything the world had ever faced. They were unstoppable with their advanced technology and their weapons that could level entire cities in mere seconds. It seemed hopeless, but there was one thing no one expected, something that would change everything. The first hint of something different came when a group of humans gathered together, trying to find shelter from the onslaught of fire. They huddled in an alleyway as the blasts rang out above them. Suddenly one of the humans, a man named David, looked up toward the sky, his face filled with confusion as he saw something strange. The alien weapons they fired at him didn't seem to do anything. The light from the beam struck him full force, but he didn't feel any pain. There was no heat, no force, no burning. Instead, it was like the energy had simply bounced off of him with no effect whatsoever. David stood frozen for a moment, unsure if he was dreaming or if the situation was real. But then the sound of another blast brought him back to reality. He ducked instinctively, but the same thing happened again. Another alien weapon fired directly at him, and once again, it bounced off like it had hit a wall, but instead of the usual destruction, there was nothing. David could hardly believe what he was seeing, and neither could the others around him. They stared in shock at him as if he were some kind of miracle. He could feel their eyes on him as he looked down at his hands and then back at the sky above. It was impossible. The weapons the aliens were using had been designed to destroy entire cities, but they couldn't even harm one human. What was happening? What did this mean for the rest of humanity? Before he could think too much about it, another blast rang out. Closer this time, and without thinking, David turned to face it. The beam was heading straight for him, but he didn't flinch. He simply stood there and watched as it hit him again. The same result. The blast hit his chest, and there was no impact, no injury. He was unharmed. David felt a strange surge of energy, a sudden feeling of power, as if the energy from the blast had simply been absorbed by his body. The other humans nearby watched in stunned silence. They were too terrified to speak, but they couldn't look away. David himself was just as stunned, but also confused. What was this power? Was it some kind of fluke, or was something more happening here? His thoughts raced, but before he could do anything, another alien craft descended, closer and closer to the ground, its massive frame casting an eerie shadow over the city streets. The ship opened its hatch, and from inside stepped a towering alien warrior clad in dark armor and holding a massive weapon. This was no mere scout. This was one of their leaders, one of the creatures in charge of the destruction of the human race. It stepped toward David, its gaze locked onto him, as if sensing something was different. The air was thick with tension. The warrior raised its weapon and aimed directly at David with cold precision. The weapon hummed as it charged up and then released a beam of intense energy unlike anything David had seen before. This was it. This was the full force of the alien weaponry. David braced himself for the impact, but as the beam hit him again, the same thing happened. It bounced off like nothing more than a harmless spark. The alien warrior's eyes widened with shock. It could not believe what it was seeing. It raised its weapon again, firing a rapid series of blasts, but they all had the same result, each one bouncing off David's skin as if you were invincible. The warrior hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react, then let out a low growl and fired once more, this time aiming for his head, but once again, the weapon had no effect. David stood there, unfazed by the assault, his heart racing with adrenaline, but his mind clear. He could feel the energy from the blast coursing through him, but it didn't hurt, it only seemed to strengthen him. The warrior paused for a moment, as if trying to comprehend what was happening. It didn't understand how this was possible, how one human could be impervious to its weapons. It stepped back for a moment to reassess the situation. But David wasn't waiting. He knew that if this warrior could be stunned by his resistance, it could be the key to humanity's survival. Something in him clicked. He had to act now while the aliens were confused, before they figured out what was going on. And so David took a step forward, his eyes locked onto the alien warrior's helmet with determination. He couldn't just stand there. He had to fight back for humanity, for his family, for the world. There was no going back. Now it wasn't just about surviving, it was about taking a stand. The warrior's confusion faded, and it stepped back up to David, ready to strike again. But this time David didn't wait. He lunged forward with a burst of speed and tackled the warrior to the ground. The aliens' weapons may have been powerful, but David had something they didn't. He had humanity's will to survive, and he wasn't going down without a fight. First encounter. The ground beneath David trembled as the alien warrior struggled beneath him, its dark armor scraping against the pavement. But David held on with all his strength. He had no idea what he was doing. All he knew was that this creature had come to destroy his world, and it was up to him to stop it with every ounce of energy he had. David pressed down harder on the alien's chest. The creature was powerful, but David's sheer determination and the unexpected power from the alien weapons bouncing off his skin gave him an edge he hadn't expected before he could think about his next move. The warrior let out a guttural snarl and twisted its body, throwing David off in one swift motion. David rolled across the street, but quickly regained his footing, his eyes locked onto the alien once more. It had already recovered and stood up taller than him, its weapon once again aimed at him with lethal precision. David's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. The warrior seemed relentless, and the aliens were clearly not going to stop until humanity was wiped out. But something had changed. David could feel it in his bones. The energy from the blasts was still surging through him, but now he felt something more, something that made him stronger than before. David stood tall and wiped the dust from his hands. It wasn't just the weapons that were different. Something was happening inside him, something deep and powerful that he couldn't quite explain. He was no longer just a man standing against impossible odds. He was something else, something the alien warriors didn't understand. The warrior seemed to notice this change too. Its weapon hummed with an eerie glow as it raised its hand to fire once more, but this time David didn't wait for it to shoot before he could even blink. He lunged forward faster than he ever thought possible. The warrior tried to react, but it was too late. David reached out and grabbed the weapon by the barrel, twisting it from the alien's hand. The warrior let out a roar of frustration as it attempted to fight back, but David was already moving with an energy he hadn't felt before. He threw the alien off balance, sending it stumbling backward. David didn't know where this strength was coming from, but it didn't matter. All he knew was that if he didn't stop this creature, now humanity might not get another chance before he could land another blow. The warrior recovered and charged at David with a roar of fury. Its strength was immense, but David didn't hesitate. He sidestepped the charge with ease and grabbed the alien by its armored shoulders, using its own momentum to slam it into the ground. The warrior let out a pained hiss, but David didn't give it a moment to recover. He raised his fist and brought it down hard onto the alien's helmet. The impact was bone-shattering, but to David's surprise, the warrior barely flinched. It was clear now that this battle was far from over. The alien was strong, but David was faster and now stronger than he had ever been before. As the alien struggled to regain its footing, David took a deep breath and assessed the situation around him. The once bustling city streets were now in chaos. Buildings were crumbling around him, and there was no telling how many more aliens were out there. The stakes were higher than ever before. David knew he couldn't just stop at one warrior if humanity had any hope of surviving. They needed more than just this victory. They needed to fight back and make a stand. David took another step back, raising his fists. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The alien warrior looked up at him, its eyes filled with rage and confusion. David could tell that it wasn't just trying to kill him anymore. It was trying to understand him. The creature was smart. It had realized that David wasn't just an ordinary human, but something more. It was the same look that had flashed across the faces of other aliens earlier when they'd tried to fight and failed. David could feel the weight of their eyes upon him. They were watching to see how he would react and whether humanity had anything left to offer. He felt the shift in the air. The aliens were no longer just invaders. They were now cautious. They were afraid of something they didn't understand. The warrior snarled again as it reached for a hidden device on its belt. With a quick motion, it pressed a button, and the air around them crackled with an electric hum. David's senses went on high alert. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The warrior was calling for backup, and there was no telling how many more of these creatures were on their way. David had no time to waste. If they didn't finish this quickly, there would be no one left to save. He had to act fast and figure out how to defeat these creatures once and for all. But there was something else, something nagging at him. He had seen the look of confusion in the aliens' eyes. It wasn't just about the fight, it was about him. Something had triggered their fear. But what was it? Why were they so afraid of a human? David could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. The warrior once again prepared to fire its weapon. But this time David wasn't waiting. He lunged once more, knocking the weapon out of the creature's hands before it could shoot at him. But as the alien stumbled backward, David saw something that changed everything. In the chaos of the struggle, he saw something flash in the alien's eyes, something that told him they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something far more dangerous, something that threatened not only humanity, but the universe itself. David's heart raced as the realization hit him. He wasn't just fighting to protect Earth, he was fighting to prevent the aliens from conquering everything, and that meant he had to find a way to stop them for good, before it was too late. The test of strength, the battle between David and the alien warrior, had only just begun, but the consequences of their struggle stretched far beyond the chaos around them. The weaponry that the aliens used seemed unstoppable, yet David had proved that human skin was somehow immune to its effects. Something about the human body absorbed the energy from these weapons and reflected it back with an intensity the aliens had never anticipated. This new discovery sent ripples of fear through the alien ranks, but it also sparked an insatiable curiosity. They needed to understand how it was possible and why it was happening to humans only. To David in particular, this question burned in the warrior's eyes, but David was too focused on surviving to answer it. His mind raced faster than his body ever could. The realization hit him like a slap across the face. The aliens didn't just want to invade, they wanted to conquer everything. They had come for more than just Earth. They had come for humanity's very essence, and David was now the key to their understanding of it. The warrior stumbled back, pushing itself to its feet. After the unexpected blow, it gave David a calculating look, as if trying to figure out his next move. David stood tall, his pulse quickening as he felt the power surge through him. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He could feel the energy from the alien attacks flooding his veins, making his muscles tense with strength he had never known. He wasn't just a human anymore. He was something else, something the aliens didn't understand, and that was his advantage. David flexed his fingers and clenched his fists, staring down the alien. Before him, it had underestimated him just like the others did, and now it was paying the price. But the battle was far from over. The alien warrior had a backup plan, and it had been waiting for the right moment to unleash it. The alien raised its arm and pressed a button on its wrist communicator. A strange hum filled the air, and the ground shook beneath their feet. David's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what that hum meant. Reinforcements were coming. The alien was calling for backup, and soon there would be more of them. More warriors who were stronger, smarter, and deadlier than the first. The realization that this could turn into an overwhelming battle hit David hard, but he didn't back down. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. No, he was going to take the fight to them and end it now or die trying. Before he could make his move, the warrior lunged at him. Again with terrifying speed. It was fast and ferocious, but David was faster. His body seemed to react on its own, now powered by the energy coursing through his veins. He ducked and weaved with ease, avoiding the strikes from the alien's claws and blows from its fist. He could feel the warrior's frustration building with every missed attack. David's movements were no longer calculated. They were instinctual. His mind was locked into a rhythm, with his body like a machine working in perfect harmony with every action and reaction. He had no time to think. He just acted. Each move felt like it was guided by a force outside of himself, like the power he had harnessed was more than just physical. It was something else, something ancient. But he didn't have time to dwell on that. Now his focus was on taking the alien down before the reinforcements arrived. David quickly darted behind the alien warrior, taking advantage of the momentary gap between the alien's attacks. He twisted the warrior's arm and slammed it into the ground, pinning it under his body. For just a moment, the warrior grunted in pain, but quickly twisted its body to break free with unnatural strength. David held onto its arm with all his might, his grip strong like steel. But it wasn't enough. The alien jerked away from him and slammed its tail into David's chest, throwing him backward. David slammed into the ground with a sickening thud. The air rushed out of his lungs, and pain exploded across his chest. But he didn't let it stop him. He was getting stronger with every attack, every blow. He could feel it in his bones. The power was growing. David pushed himself off the ground, his hands shaking from the force of the impact. But he didn't let the pain slow him down. No, he wasn't going to stop. Not now. The alien warrior slowly stood up, its body gleaming in the strange light of the city as it prepared to face David once again. But David was ready now. He had no intention of letting this alien leave with his life. He couldn't and wouldn't let the warriors take this victory away from humanity. He had come too far to let this chance slip through his fingers. David focused his mind and found the power within himself to push forward with new strength. His body surged with adrenaline as he rushed the alien without hesitation. His fist collided with the alien's face with such force that the warrior stumbled back in surprise. But David wasn't done yet. He pressed the attack with a flurry of strikes, hitting the alien's vulnerable spots with precision after precision. The warrior tried to fight back, but the attacks were too much. It couldn't withstand the onslaught anymore. David's last punch landed square on the warrior's chest, and with a deafening crack, the alien collapsed to the ground, its body twitching once before going completely still. David stood over it, panting, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He couldn't believe what had just happened. It was over. The alien was down and out, but it wasn't the end. David knew this was just the beginning. Reinforcements were coming, and they wouldn't be as easy to defeat as this first warrior. No, he had to be ready. The fight had only just begun, but something else lingered in the air. Something David couldn't shake. It wasn't just the aliens that were coming for him. It was something deeper, something more terrifying than the alien forces. It was the realization that the power coursing through his body was more than just an accident. It was something intentional, something the aliens hadn't planned for, and that scared David more than anything else. It was then that he realized that whatever had made him different wasn't just his immunity to their weapons. It was something more, something that could change the fate of humanity forever. And if he didn't figure it out soon, it might be too late for everyone. The hidden enemy. David's pulse raced as he stood over the fallen alien warrior, his body still surging with energy from the battle. But his mind was racing faster than his heart. The power inside him felt like an uncharted force, something wild and uncontrollable. He knew the moment he defeated the first alien warrior, it wasn't over. They had only just begun to understand what he was, and the thought terrified him as much as it empowered him. In the distance, he could hear the rumble of alien ships as they descended toward the ground. The reinforcements were coming, and they were bringing more than just weapons. They were bringing an army that was smarter and more ruthless than the first wave, and David could feel the weight of their arrival in his bones. He had no time to waste, no time to wonder about what was happening to him, or why his skin could absorb and reflect the alien energy. He had to focus on what was in front of him. The war was escalating fast, and he was right in the middle of it. The ground trembled once again as a massive alien craft landed nearby. It was far larger than the first, and its presence sent a chill down David's spine. This was no longer just a battle between one human and one alien. This was war, and David was standing in the center of it all. As the ship's hatch opened, a new wave of alien warriors stepped out. These were different, though not like the first one. They were taller, more imposing. Their armor was darker and more complex, as if they had been specially designed for something more than just combat. These were leaders, and they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end it all. The first one to step forward was an alien whose presence alone made the air around him heavy with authority. His eyes glowed with a cold light, and his voice echoed through the streets like a thunderstorm. He spoke in a language David didn't understand, but there was no mistaking the malice in his tone. The alien leader stood still for a moment before his eyes turned to David, his gaze sharp and calculating. He had seen something in David that the first warrior had not seen. David had learned to fight back with strength, but these aliens knew something David didn't know yet. The warrior's face twisted into a sneer as he stepped forward, his soldiers moving in sync behind him. David took a deep breath and braced himself. He knew these aliens weren't like the others. They had come to finish the job, and it wouldn't be as easy to defeat them, not without knowing their weaknesses. They began to close in on him, circling him slowly. David stood his ground, but his heart pounded in his chest. The warrior's eyes never left him, as if calculating his every move. This was no longer a battle of fists. This was a game of strategy, and David had no idea what the rules were. The alien leader spoke again, his voice rising in anger as he gestured to the ground around them. David looked around him and saw more alien troops emerging from the shadows behind the buildings. They were everywhere, and each one seemed to be waiting for something, for an order to attack, and David realized with a start that they were waiting for him to make the first move. They had learned from the first fight. They knew David wasn't like other humans, and now they were ready to exploit his every weakness. David's mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this, but there was no way out, no easy escape. He had to fight and survive. But how David's thoughts turned to the power he had discovered within himself. The energy that flowed through his body when the alien weapons hit him. It was clear now that whatever this power was, it was part of him, but he didn't know how to control it, or even how to use it to its fullest potential. He couldn't let them figure it out before he did, or it would be the end of humanity. He had to take control. He had to be the one to dictate the terms of this fight before the aliens could use their knowledge against him. The alien leader stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate and calculated, as he raised a hand to signal his forces to hold back for a moment. David's mind raced faster now than ever before. This was it. This was his chance to figure it out. He focused on the power within himself, the energy that had flowed through him after each alien weapon hit him. He tried to understand it, to connect with it in a way that would give him an advantage, but it wasn't easy. The energy was chaotic, wild, like a storm that couldn't be tamed. It seemed to have a life of its own, and David was struggling to keep up. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, focusing every ounce of his being on the strange force coursing through him. He could feel it. Now it was like a pulse, like a heartbeat deep within him, and the more he focused, the stronger it became. He could feel the power growing, as if it was waking up, ready to be unleashed. David didn't understand it, but he knew he had to trust it. He had no choice. The alien leader was close now. His eyes narrowed in suspicion as he watched David closely. The tension between them was thick, as if they were both waiting for the other to make a mistake. David's heart raced as he opened his eyes and stared back at the alien leader. He knew what he had to do. The energy inside him surged forward like a tidal wave crashing into the shore, and suddenly, it was like he wasn't just a man anymore. He was something else, something that could stand toe-to-toe with the alien leader, and not just survive, but win. David's body moved without thinking, his fist charged with power as he swung at the alien leader. The alien tried to block, but it was too late. David's strike hit with such force that it sent the alien stumbling backward. His soldiers watched in shock as their leader faltered. David's breath was heavy, his body thrumming with power as he moved in for another strike, but this time the alien leader was ready. He dodged quickly and countered with a blow of his own. David's vision blurred as the blow struck his side, but the power inside him didn't falter, it only grew stronger. David gritted his teeth and pushed forward with renewed strength. He wasn't going to let this alien take control, not now, not ever. He could feel the energy inside him rising with each moment, and with every step he took toward the alien leader. David knew that this fight was far from over, but now he had the upper hand, and for the first time since the invasion began, he truly felt like he had a chance to win the escape plan. David stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest as the alien leader stumbled back from his last blow. The power within him surged as if his body was alive with energy. The alien warriors around him watched in stunned silence, their leader clearly shaken by the force of David's strike. But David knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The alien leader quickly regained his composure, his eyes burning with fury as he assessed David in a new light. The alien had never expected a human to possess this kind of strength. The energy that coursed through David's body was something they had never seen before, something that had shaken their confidence to the core. The leader raised his hand, signaling for his troops to prepare. But there was no time for waiting, no time to regroup. David felt the tension rising as he took a step forward, his body still thrumming with the power that had come from the alien weapons, the power that had made him stronger with each attack. And now it was his turn to take the fight to them. The alien leader's eyes narrowed as he studied David with growing suspicion. He was clearly trying to figure out what David had become, what made him so different from every other human he had encountered. But David didn't have the luxury of answering the leader's questions. He didn't have time to explain what had happened or why he had become something more than human. All that mattered now was survival. The alien leader charged at David with a speed that caught him off guard, its armor glinting in the light as it swung its weapon toward him. But David was ready. He had no choice but to fight back with everything he moved swiftly, dodging the alien's attacks with a speed and precision that surprised even him. His body seemed to react on its own now, as if it knew exactly what to do. Every move felt instinctual, and the more the alien fought back, the more David's strength seemed to grow. It was like the power inside him fed off the battle like a flame that burned brighter with every strike. David's fists landed on the alien's chest with a resounding impact, but the alien leader was no weakling. It recovered quickly and countered with a blow of its own. David barely had time to react before the alien's tail whipped around and slammed into his side, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain shot through his ribs. David didn't let it stop him. He was getting used to the pain, used to the way his body surged with power only to be knocked down again and again. The fight was taking its toll on him, but he knew he couldn't stop now. The stakes were too high. The alien leader raised its weapon again and aimed it directly at David. But this time something was different. David could feel the air around him growing thicker. The power within him still surged, but now there was something else, something darker, something that told him this wasn't just about defeating the alien. It was about survival. It was about winning at any cost. David gritted his teeth and forced himself to his feet, his legs shaking from the strain of the battle. But his resolve was stronger than ever. He wasn't going to let these aliens win. He wasn't going to let them take over his world. The alien leader's eyes gleamed with malice as it prepared to fire, but David was faster this time. He lunged at the alien with all his might, his body powered by the strange energy that had given him the strength to keep going, even when he thought he couldn't. But as he closed in on the alien leader, the unthinkable happened. A pulse of energy erupted from the alien leader's weapon, sending a shockwave that knocked David off his feet once more. But this time he didn't fall completely. Instead, he rolled, with the impact using the momentum to launch himself back into the air and land on his feet before the alien could react. David was on him again. This time he struck with everything. He had his fist connecting with the alien leader's chest with such force that the creature let out a roar of pain. But it wasn't enough. The leader staggered backward, but it wasn't finished. It quickly recovered and raised its weapon once more. But as it aimed, David saw something else, something that made his blood run cold. There was more to this alien than he had realized. It wasn't just a warrior, it was something else. It was a strategist, it was a leader, and it had a plan. David's heart skipped a beat as the alien leader began to activate something on its wrist. The ground beneath them began to rumble, and a loud screeching sound filled the air. David's mind raced. He knew what was coming, but he didn't know how to stop it. The alien leader had triggered something, a beacon, something that would call for reinforcements, something that would bring more ships and more soldiers. The cavalry was coming, and they wouldn't stop until David and the rest of humanity were wiped out. David's mind scrambled as he looked around him, his body still aching from the previous blows. But he couldn't afford to waste time. He had to think of a plan, a way to stop this before it was too late. The alien soldiers had begun to move again, positioning themselves to form a circle around him, their weapons raised and ready to strike. David's only chance was to break their formation, to create an opening, something that would allow him to get close enough to the alien leader and stop the beacon from calling reinforcements. He couldn't fight them all at once. He had to be strategic, and he had to act fast. He gathered the power within him once more and focused it into his legs. With a burst of speed, David rushed toward the alien soldiers, dodging their blasts as he sprinted through the battlefield. He could feel the energy surging through him. But this time it wasn't just strength. It was something else, something that told him if he didn't make this work, if he didn't destroy the beacon, humanity was done for. David reached the alien leader just as it activated the final command. He could hear the hum of the incoming reinforcements growing louder and louder in his ears. But he didn't stop. He charged forward and tackled the alien leader to the ground, pinning it beneath him with all his weight. The alien struggled beneath him, but David was too focused to let go. He reached for the alien's wrist, and with a single powerful twist, he ripped the beacon from its arm. Before it could send the call to the other ships, the alien leader let out a scream of frustration as it tried to break free, but David held firm. He had won for now. But the battle was far from over. The alien forces would regroup, and they would be back with more strength. But David had proven something today, that humanity wasn't done yet, and that he wasn't just a man. He was a force that could stand against the greatest threats the universe could throw at him. Humanity had a chance now, but it would take everything to hold on to it. The final stand. David stood over the defeated alien leader, his breath coming in heavy gasps, his chest still heaving with the force of the battle he had just fought. The beacon that had been attached to the alien leader's wrist now lay shattered on the ground beside them, its power neutralized for the moment. But David knew it was only a temporary victory. Reinforcements were coming. The alien forces would not stop until they had wiped out humanity and everything David had fought for. But for now he had done what seemed impossible. He had faced down the alien invaders and emerged victorious in the face of overwhelming odds. His mind was racing as he surveyed the battlefield around him. The once bustling city streets now lay in ruins. Buildings torn apart by the alien weapons' explosions still rocked the horizon. The sky was filled with the smoke of burning structures, and the sounds of distant gunfire could be heard as the last pockets of human resistance tried to hold their ground. But despite the chaos, there was a quiet moment in the air, a moment of peace as David stood there alone, his thoughts focused on the task at hand. He had to prepare for what came next. The alien leader struggled beneath him, but David's grip was unyielding. He knew that he couldn't let the leader escape, not now, not after everything they had been through. With one swift motion he pressed his knee into the alien's chest, holding it in place as it let out a low growl of defiance. David wasn't sure how much longer the alien would remain conscious, but he wasn't about to give it the chance to escape. He had already seen how quickly the aliens could regroup, how fast they could bring their forces back together, and he couldn't afford to waste a single moment. David's hands were covered in the alien's blood, but it didn't matter to him, not now, not when the future of humanity hung in the balance. He couldn't let this alien leader live. He couldn't allow it to send for reinforcements again. And so, with the weight of the decision pressing down on him, he reached for the leader's neck and squeezed. David could feel the alien's heart race beneath his palm, but it didn't matter. He was done playing games with them. He was done running from the enemy. The alien's struggles grew weaker and weaker, until they finally stopped completely. David stood up slowly, releasing the lifeless body of the alien from his grip. He looked down at it for a moment as a sense of finality washed over him. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. There was still so much more to do. He couldn't rest yet. There was no time to rest, not while the rest of the alien forces were still out there, and David had no illusions about how much strength they still had left. They would be back for revenge. They would want to test humanity once more to see if the human race could survive, or if they were just a fluke, something that had been able to defeat one warrior, but no more. David knew what he had to do next. The first wave of aliens had been dealt with, but the rest of their army was still coming, and they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out everything. David loved everything humanity had built over the centuries. The question now was how he could stop them, how he could keep them from making Earth their own. But before he could answer that question, a voice echoed in his mind. It was the alien leader's voice speaking to him in a language that was foreign, yet somehow familiar. It wasn't speaking aloud, but in David's head. The words were clear, as if they had been imprinted directly into his mind. David's heart skipped a beat as the voice spoke again. You cannot stop what is coming, human. You are too weak to understand the forces you are meddling with. The voice was chilling. It resonated with a coldness that sent a shiver down David's spine. You have no idea what you have awakened, the voice continued. The power you have stolen from us is not meant for your kind. It will destroy you just as it will destroy us. David gritted his teeth as the voice continued its ominous warning, but he refused to let it control him, refused to let it shake his resolve. He had already come this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. We will return, the voice finished. And when we do, you will regret challenging us. David's fists clenched as he shook off the voice. He wouldn't let it distract him. He had to stay focused. There was too much at stake. He had to get ready for what was coming next. But just as he was about to make a move, something else caught his attention. A flash of movement out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of hope in the midst of all the destruction. The rest of the human resistance was still fighting. They were still standing strong. They hadn't given up yet. David felt a renewed sense of purpose as he looked toward them. They were his people. They were the ones he had to protect. They were the ones who had stood by him, and now they were depending on him. Just as he had depended on them in the past, the next battle was going to be even harder than the last, but David knew he wasn't alone anymore, and that was something the aliens hadn't counted on. The strength of humanity was not just in its ability to fight, but in its ability to come together, to unite in the face of adversity. No matter how dark things got, they would find a way to survive, and David was going to lead them to that survival. He wasn't just fighting for his life. Now he was fighting for the future of the human race. The rest of the alien army would come, but he would be ready this time. They would face a united humanity, a humanity that wasn't afraid to fight back. David took one last look at the fallen alien leader before turning toward the resistance. He knew that no matter what came next, he had to be ready for the final stand. He had to show the world that humanity could survive and thrive. Even against the most impossible of odds, the war had only just begun, and David was ready to lead humanity to victory, a new alliance. David's gaze shifted over the battlefield once more, his heart heavy with the weight of the choices. Ahead of him, the alien leader lay lifeless on the ground, and with it, the first chapter of humanity's resistance had ended. But the war was far from over. The rest of the alien forces were still out there, and they had learned from their previous mistakes. They were preparing for something much larger, much more dangerous than the initial invasion. David could feel it in his bones. The fight was just beginning. But this time things were different. This time, humanity was not fighting alone. It had been a long time since David had felt the strength of true unity, but now he could feel it pulsing through him. The bond that had been formed between humans in the face of this invasion was stronger than any weapon the aliens could wield. David had already seen how the human race could survive even in the most hopeless of circumstances. He had seen it in their faces, the determination to keep going, even when the odds were against them. That was humanity's greatest weapon, not the power to absorb alien energy, not the strange force that flowed through his veins, but the heart of every individual who refused to give up. It wasn't just about fighting back, it was about standing together and facing the unknown as one. David's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound, the distant rumble of alien ships descending from the skies. More of them were coming, but this time it was different. The human resistance was ready. They had no intention of letting the aliens take Earth without a fight. David could see the fire in their eyes, the will to protect their home, to protect their families, and everything they had fought for. The war had taken so much already. It had shattered cities, destroyed lives, and torn apart everything humanity had once taken for granted. But through it all, David had witnessed something extraordinary. The resilience of the human spirit had not wavered no matter how brutal the fight, no matter how much they had lost. The humans had come together, and now they were ready to face the enemy, not with fear, but with defiance and strength. David turned to the others around him, his closest allies, the ones who had fought beside him. Every step of the way they were battered, bruised, but alive. They were a symbol of humanity's refusal to be broken, no matter how overwhelming the odds. David knew that. They were stronger together. They had already proven that. But there was still one more thing they needed to do. They needed to take the fight to the aliens. Now was the time to make their stand before the enemy could regroup, before they could make their next move. David had the power of the unknown force inside him, but he knew it wasn't enough to rely on his strength. Alone he couldn't do this, without the help of the resistance, without the support of every single person who had stood beside him from the very beginning. They needed to form a plan, an alliance that could rival the alien forces, and they needed to do it. Now David walked toward the front of the resistance, the others following behind him, their faces grim but determined. He could see the same fire in their eyes. The same readiness to fight. The humans had been tested in every possible way, and they had survived. Now they were ready to strike back, but this time it would be different. David didn't have to speak the words. They were all on the same page. They knew what needed to be done. The alliance was forged in the heat of battle, in the face of defeat and despair, and now it was time to solidify it into something more than just a group of survivors. It was time for humanity to take control of its destiny and show the aliens that they had underestimated the strength of the human spirit. David could feel the energy surging within him again. But this time it wasn't just his strength, it was the strength of everyone who had joined him in this fight. And that power was something the aliens could never hope to match. The alien ships hovered in the sky, growing closer by the second. The war was not over, but David knew something the aliens didn't know. Something they could never understand. Humanity's power was in its unity. The ships descended to the ground, the alien soldiers disembarking and forming ranks in preparation for their assault. But as they moved toward the human resistance, they were met with something they had never seen before, something that shocked them into hesitation. The humans weren't afraid. They were ready for battle. And they were fighting for more than just survival. They were fighting for a future. They were fighting for their world and their way of life. The first shots rang out as the human resistance fired back at the advancing alien soldiers. The battle had begun again, but this time it was different. This time it was an all-out war for Earth's future. The aliens quickly realized that they had underestimated the resilience of humanity. They had expected Earth's inhabitants to cower and submit. But what they encountered was a united force, a people who had fought for their survival and who were now ready to fight for their freedom. David's role in this new fight was clear. He wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol of everything humanity had become. He had unlocked something within himself, something the aliens had never anticipated. But it was more than just his power that had made a difference. It was the power of the human spirit, the will to survive and thrive in the face of adversity. The battle raged on as the human resistance pushed back the alien forces with everything. They had every bullet, every strike, every bit of energy they had left was thrown into the fight, but David knew it wasn't enough to just fight back. They needed to end this once and for all. They needed to strike at the heart of the alien invasion and destroy it before the aliens could regroup and bring more reinforcements. David looked to his allies and gave a single nod. They were ready. It was time to make their final stand. The alien leader's body was already a symbol of their defeat. But David knew that the true victory lay in the power of humanity coming together as one. David charged forward, leading the charge as the human resistance followed his lead. The alien forces were pushed back at every turn, their weapons no match for the combined strength of the human resistance and the mysterious power that flowed through David as he led the charge. The battle reached its climax as David and the resistance reached the alien ships and destroyed them from within. One by one, the alien ships fell to the ground, crashing in flames. But David wasn't finished yet. There was one final thing he needed to do before this war could be over. He turned to the remaining alien forces, the ones who had come to Earth to conquer and destroy humanity. He knew that there was no other way forward. Humanity had already won the war, but they needed to send a message to the aliens once and for all that Earth was not their playground, that humanity would never be enslaved again. With a final surge of power, David sent out a signal, one last defiant message to the aliens. Earth was no longer theirs. It was humanity's world, and the war was over. The battle for Earth had been won, but the true victory lay in the unity of humanity and the strength that came from standing together. David looked around at his allies. They had done it together. They had fought back, and now humanity had a chance to rebuild. But more than that, humanity had shown the universe that no one would ever conquer them again. No one would ever threaten their world again. And as David stood there watching the remnants of the alien forces retreat, he knew that humanity's story was only just beginning. It was a story of resilience, strength, and unity. And nothing would ever take that from them again. David stood there looking out over the battlefield. The dust had begun to settle, and the sky above was slowly clearing. The wreckage of the alien ships lay scattered across the ground, twisted metal and broken machinery, evidence of the fierce battle that had taken place. Humanity had fought back against the greatest threat it had ever faced and emerged victorious as the sun began to rise over the fine horizon. David couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with exhaustion. The fight had been long and grueling, but humanity had proven something to itself, something no one could ever take away. They had proven their strength, their resilience, their ability to rise even in the face of the impossible. David's mind drifted to the people who had fought beside him, those who had stood by his side through the darkest hours of the battle. They were the true heroes, the ones who had shown what it meant to fight for a cause greater than themselves. They had all given everything to protect their world, to protect their future, and now they stood together, victorious. The alien forces were gone for now, their ships destroyed, their leaders defeated. But David knew the war wasn't just about fighting back. It was about more than survival. It was about what humanity stood for, the values that made them who they were, their compassion, their courage, their ability to stand united when everything seemed lost. Those were the things that set them apart from the invaders who had tried to tear their world apart. And as David stood there taking in the quiet after the storm, he realized that this victory was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. A chapter where they would rebuild stronger than ever before, a chapter where they would honor the sacrifices made by those who had fought and fallen in the battle for Earth. The aliens had underestimated them. They thought they could come to Earth and take what they wanted, but they had learned the hard way that humanity was not something to be conquered. David turned to face his allies who were gathered nearby. Their faces tired but determined. They had all been through so much, but they had made it through together. Now they were standing on the precipice of a new future, a future where they would no longer be powerless in the face of threats from beyond their world. They had proven that they were capable of so much more than anyone had given them credit for. They had shown the universe that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and with that knowledge, David felt a surge of pride. He had seen humanity at its worst, but now he was seeing it at its best, united and unbreakable. This battle had been won, but the real work was just beginning, rebuilding the world, healing the wounds left by the invasion, and forging new alliances with the other species they had met during the fight. David knew that humanity would be ready for whatever came next. They had already faced the impossible and emerged victorious. There was no threat too great, no challenge too insurmountable. The human race was stronger than ever, and nothing would ever change that. As David looked out over the horizon, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had been a part of something bigger than himself. He had helped to shape the future of humanity, and that was a feeling he would never forget. The battle was over. The aliens had been defeated, and now humanity would rise from the ashes to build a future. They could be proud of. The world would be different now, but it would be their world, their home, and they would protect it, no matter what came next. David smiled to himself, knowing that whatever happened, they had shown the universe the true power of humanity, and it was a power that could never be extinguished. The end.